His father was away, so it was Brandon's duty to give the eulogies. Martin Soferac died protecting his hold and his people. Peter Muro will be held in the hearts of his wife and children for their entire lives. Carl Orver was a beloved friend to us all. Starting at dawn, he had to give 58 eulogies, stand over 58 graves, listen to the wailing of at least 100 crying orphans, and hold at least 50 mourning widows. He felt the immense strain of seeing so many lives lost, so many orphans and widows, those who left behind nothing, who would disappear into history, forgotten. No one would remember their names in 100 years. Many had died before in that very courtyard, at that very gate over the centuries. Brandon knew not one of their names. That thought left him empty, as though something was being sucked from his very heart. Why? Why did any of them have to die? His eyes were sore after that. He decided he would visit the infirmary where his Uncle Eldon was treating those who were injured. The smell in the room was rank, and it had a heavy, damp feel. Beds were lined against both walls, about 50 in the long room. The sheer helplessness of the injured made his eyes flood. There was a man who had been stabbed through the leg. When he asked his uncle if that man would be okay, he said, "He will live, but he will walk with a limp the rest of his days. The wound is too big, and it won't mend properly. Walking will be a struggle." Another had both of his eyes gouged out. He would see nothing as long as he lived. He would never see how his children would grow, never witness the beauty of a sunset, never behold the winter's snow. The only things he would take forward were the memories of the days when he could see. Another had his fingers chewed off by wolves. He would never wield a sword, never hold a fork. Opening doors would be an ordeal. Any work he might have done would not be there for him in this condition. What would he eat? How would he make his living? Others were moaning in pain. His uncle was only one man, and though he had a few boys and girls to help him, there were so many injuries that he could not tend them all in time, and some wounds had festered. His uncle guessed that a quarter would survive. And we are quickly running out of poppy seeds. Many of them will soon wish for death. Brandon stood next to his uncle at the end of the long room where dying men laid in agony, wiping the wetness that had trailed down his face. "Joshua needs to see this." "He has," said Uncle Eldon. "He had the same reaction as you." "He cried?" "He did." Uncle Eldon placed a hand on Brandon's shoulder. "And he said you needed to see this. You both want the same thing, Brandon. Please do not fight. Your father and I have had disagreements, yes, but we understood each other. That's my problem. I don't understand him, and I don't think he wants to understand me." Brandon returned to his room. His ribs ached as he sat on his bed. He didn't so much as grunt. What those men down there are suffering is far worse than what I feel. He grabbed his pillow and wailed into it. He sat, crying into his pillow for hours. He invited every orphan and widow to dinner at the Long Hall that night. The Long Hall was extremely long. Trees a yard thick and 10 yards tall were placed as columns down the hall that stretched at least a furlong. A long blue rug ran under a table across a stone floor to the stone throne. The table was made from a gigantic tree that had been cut down the center, and the most the hall had ever recorded seating was 500, though it could fit many more. Dinner that night was a stew of chicken and potatoes and carrots on toasted bread, a true feast in Larksvale. More than 100 widowed wives and fatherless children ate at the Long Hall that night. Joshua came and sat next to him, which surprised him. The last time he had seen Josh, He was calling Jordan a bastard and screaming about his finger. Now he seemed much more somber, and his eyes were red. "It's a good thing you've done, Brandon, inviting them to dinner like this," he whispered. "What is he saying? Is he approving of me? Has he finally changed his mind?" "I'm glad you're coming around, Josh." Josh did not look happy. "I took a trip to the infirmary. It was horrible. I thought about the countless men across the years who have died at that very gate, and how I knew not one of their names. We cannot let that happen. We mustn't let them be forgotten to time." Brandon didn't smile, but his heart was happy. He and his brother had finally agreed on something. From now on, he would have cooperation from Josh. His injury appeared to have humbled him. Having his finger cut off was the best thing to ever happen to him. "I agree. That makes me glad as I can be on a day like this. We cannot let those men die in vain. Those men must be avenged. I will help you prepare the counter-strike after dinner." Brandon was no longer happy. "What did you say?" he said, too loudly. "I just buried 58 men today, and you're ready to send out more? We're running out of poppy, and I'm going to need to bury 38 more by next week, and you want to put more men in the infirmary?" Josh was taken aback. "Brandon, that's not what I'm saying." There were widows and orphans at the table. Brandon put his hand up. "Shut your mouth. I know what you're saying, and I hate it." "We don't need to lose any more men if we're smart," Josh said. "So these men are dead because they weren't smart? These children have no father because they weren't smart enough, Josh?" Brandon stood from his chair, his ribs aching, making him angrier at Josh. "Get out. I don't want you here." Josh was speechless for once. "Brandon, no, Joshua! Leave now." Josh left without a word. "I apologize, everyone. Please, stay for dessert. We have cookies." Brandon sat and wiped the wrinkles out of his breeches. Dinner was finished, and the sun had just dipped under the mountains. Brandon had returned to his room, where he was lighting candles for the night. Suddenly, Jordan burst through the door. "Brandon, it's Father." Brandon followed Jordan as fast as he was able to the infirmary, where his Lord Father laid, bloody. The wound ran from his collar to his belly button, a long slice that went deep. Josh stood silent, grabbing at his mouth with his good hand as Uncle Eldon handled dozens of bloody rags, trying to treat the wound. "When did this happen?" Brandon asked, frantic. His Lord Father spoke, as though nothing had been wrong. "You tell Hard Al he was right. There's a demon out there. Bastard caught me right in the shoulder, cleaved through my spalder with that damn halberd. A silver giant, that thing. Get the men ready. We need to kill that damn thing. Did they bring that sheep I killed? I got the sheep for you, Brandon, just like I said." Uncle Eldon walked Brandon outside into a long, dark hall. His breath was heavy, and his eyes were red. "Brandon, though he speaks jovially, your father is gravely injured. The cut goes so deep, through bone. It's a wonder he's still alive at all. I have done everything I can, and I may be able to mend it, but he has lost too much blood. He will not survive the night." Brandon wanted to scream, or wail, or shoot water out of his eyes. Nothing would come. No tear, no cry. Had he cried every tear he had earlier that day? Were all of his screams used up? Had the river in his soul run dry already? His stomach wrenched, and he was terrified, but he could not react. He peeked into the infirmary, and Jordan was kneeling at their father's side, tears streaming down his face. Josh stood, his eyes and face red. Why did this need to happen? This would not be the first time they had suffered loss. 5 years or so prior, their 2 youngest brothers had been slain by their middle brother, Benjamin, a year or 2 younger than Josh. Brandon remembered that night, Josh beating hay bales with a sword, their father throwing things. Benjamin was exiled that very night. That didn't need to happen either. There was no reason for it, as far as he knew. They were only boys. Twins, 13 years of age. He was angry at Benjamin at this moment, as though this were his fault too. They returned to his father's side. As the night went on, Lord Pernton's condition worsened. His speech was becoming slurred, and his breaths were heavy. Remember that one time I took the head off the mount? And the rider? One swing. Brandon grabbed his father's hand. Yeah, Dad. Tell it again. I was facing one of those sheep guys from up north. I was about Jordan's age. He was coming at me with that halberd. I took my longsword. He was only able to tell half of his story. Longsword was the last word out of Lord Pernton's mouth, just the way he would have wanted. Welcome to the Storytime Saturday podcast. I'm your host, TGD. We have a short chapter this week, only 1,600 words. We see Brandon taking on some lordly duties, and tragedy strikes. So this is a shorter chapter. It's only around 1,600 words, so there's not going to be a whole lot to say about it. This is going to be one of the shorter episodes, the shorter podcasts. So, as far as the writing goes, this is not, other than the regular stuff, the regular wrong punctuation and formatting issues, this chapter, there's no real big issues, other than the usual stuff of too many adverbs, commas where there should be a semicolon, things like that. So let's take a look at a few of our characters. Let's start with Brandon. So in the first half of the chapter, we see the strain that death is taking on him. So it's setting in for him the reality that these people that he grew up with, that were always around, that he knew from the city, that they're gone. That they're gone for good. And that's really setting in on him, and it's weighing him down. He cries into a pillow for hours. So we see that he's emotional. We see he has a great deal of sympathy. When he goes to the infirmary, we see him really thinking about how this is affecting the survivors. Even the guy that has his eyes gouged out, he thinks about how he'll never see his children grow, he'll never witness a sunset or behold the winter's snow. The man who is stabbed through the leg, he'll be permanently crippled. He sees the plight of the widows and the orphans, which he becomes an orphan. Well, I guess he's an adult, so adults don't become orphans, right? But we do see a lot of sympathy from Brandon, him really considering the cost of what's happened. Now, we do actually catch a glimpse of perhaps cruelty from Brandon when he says about Josh having his finger cut off was the best thing to ever happen to him. A little flicker here of cruelty in Brandon. Of course, this is only speaking of the book version of Brandon. Real Brandon's not like this in real life, so don't be offended or worry or think any more or less of Brandon because he's not like this in real life. This is just his name and appearance that is taken. Uncle Eldon, we get to see him in action in the infirmary taking care of people, and we get to see that really the entire burden of medicine is only on him. He has some assistance, but he's really the only one who can take care of all these people. So he's bearing the burden of treating literally everyone by himself. We see that he's trying to be a peace broker between Brandon and Josh. He knows that they're not getting along great, and he tries to broker a peace deal between the two. He's like, you two need to understand each other. Now let's talk about Josh. Now we see Josh has a similar epiphany to Brandon. Josh himself goes to the infirmary. He himself looks out at the courtyard about the people who will be forgotten. That in 100 years, no one will know the names of any of those people. His trip to the infirmary, he can't bear the death that their hold is suffering. But we see a bit of a separation here. So him and Brandon they like proverbially shake hands on understanding that, hey, this thing that happened was really bad. Which, to us is kind of obvious, but this is, for the two of them, this is finally something they can agree on. But this event, we see, they both see the same thing. They both have the same set of facts, and they go two completely different paths. So Brandon wants to put an end to wars altogether, where Josh refuses to let the people who died die in vain, die for no reason, that nothing was won from their deaths. Their deaths didn't purchase anything. So this is the crux of the conflict between the two brothers for the rest of the book. Now let's take a look at a few notes I wrote down. We do see Uncle Eldon using poppy seeds. He says, we're running out of poppy seeds. We saw that in the prologue, that poppy seeds are having problems getting around. And poppy seeds are used like narcotics, just like in Game of Thrones. Instead of calling it milk of the poppy or poppy elixir, I just said poppy seeds. Does that work? Do you just feed people poppy seeds and it's like, I don't know if I looked into that too much. I don't know if I did my research on that. If poppy seeds could be used as narcotics. But yeah, that is heavily lifting from Game of Thrones. Now Larksvale lost 50 plus men in a battle they won, that they had the advantage with. I wrote this note down to sort of help you understand how big Larksvale is, that it's not just like a tiny village. It's a big place. Because I'm not good at describing how big the town is. In my book, John and the Wizard, the first draft of that, I sent my sister the first draft and then the second draft, and I said, does this help out? Does this make it any better? In the second draft, can you tell that River Bottom is an actual city and not just like a village? She's like, yeah. So back when I wrote this, even back here, I didn't understand quite how to say it was a big place. So Larksville is a big place that they lost 50 men in a battle they won. So this was not like a small skirmish. It was a big battle. Maybe a few hundred people, maybe 1,000 people participated in total. I didn't actually ever specify, did I? I don't believe so. Now, another note, we actually learned some information as Brandon is thinking about the tragedy of his father's impending demise, that he thinks back to when he lost his twin brothers a number of years ago. And we learn that Benjamin, who is the middle brother, slayed the two youngest brothers. So this is the first time we learn this. This is the first time that it's actually stated that Benjamin, like the name Benjamin is said. We heard that the brothers died or that the brothers were killed, but I think this is the first time that we actually hear that their middle brother Benjamin killed their two youngest brothers. And that's all we know. We don't know why, we don't know the circumstances, but we also know that Benjamin was exiled that very night. So we also learn that the two youngest were twins. Keep that in mind. Keep in mind that Lord Purrington's seed produces twins. Will that be relevant later? Maybe not. I don't even know if I ended up deciding. So Lord Purrington being defeated by the Silver Demon is a pivotal moment. This is really the I guess the pivot. I don't know what else to say, but the pivotal moment. This is what sets Jordan on his path for the rest of the books. This is what sets Josh deeper in his conviction, and that says Brandon deeper into his. And one last note before we end. Brandon, when he is speaking to the orphans and widows, he says, "Please stay, we have cookies." And that's probably a subtle nod to the meme, "Come to the dark side, we have cookies," since Brandon, in real life, is of course a Star Wars fan. Quite serious Star Wars fan, so that might be a bit of a reference there. So next week, we go back to Warren's place and check out the rest of the tournament. I believe this is the semifinals. No, it's not the semifinals yet. But we're getting close. The tournament arc is drawing closer to an end. This might be the halfway point in the tournament arc next week. Now, come back. Come back next week to see what happens with Sir Jacob in the next arc of the tournament, the next segment of the tournament. But that's it for this week. Again, it was a bit of a shorter episode, especially compared to the tournament chapters. Those ones are much longer. But they don't all have to be long, do they? But I enjoyed you being here. Thanks for joining me for the Storytime Saturday podcast. If you didn't like the video, make sure you like it. If you're not subscribed, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. And anywhere you're listening to this, make sure you follow and like and help me get out there. So I'd appreciate you doing that. This has been the Storytime Saturday podcast, and I'll see you next week.